We have James Hunt, who's going to give us a presentation now. James is the UK originator for Vattenfall.
Yes.
So, James, the floor is yours.
Oh, good morning, everybody. And I'd just like to introduce a little bit about Vattenfall, in case you don't know who we are. We are a Swedish state-owned energy company, energy utility. We're one of the largest renewable generators in Europe. In the UK, we have about a gigawatt of wind installed, and we've been installing that since 2008. And we're also now providing a range of other services to the UK, including supply contracts. So come see our stand. But in terms of corporate PPAs, I'd just like to sort of run you through some of the reasons why people are looking at these, because they're a hot topic really in the sort of market. A lot of people talk about them, and it's kind of worthwhile understanding why people are considering them. I think with the topic that we're discussing on this whole forum about uncertainty, I think this is where corporate PPAs kind of are looking to reduce risk in terms of the longer term future. So what is a corporate PPA? It's basically an agreement between a corporate consumer and a renewable generator to buy and sell electricity. Pretty simple, really. And basically, the generator's aims are to try and get some certainty in relation to its income and find someone who is going to be there for the long term, so a creditworthy off-taker, so that they can make a positive investment case and actually deliver the electricity you guys need in the future. From the corporate side, there's a number of different reasons we see people interested in corporate PPAs. Some people come from it very much from the sustainability perspective. They want to get by renewable energy. They want to know where that renewable energy comes from, and they want to get benefits from marketing and association with it. Others are looking for price certainty that comes from being able to contract a long-term contract outside of the current products you can buy in the market. So most people will have supply contracts, flexible purchasing contracts, and they can probably buy 2, 3 years. Maybe from time to time your supplier will offer you 4 or 5, but they don't trade very regularly. And there's not a lot of liquidity in this. So if you want to buy a long-term contract, a PPA is pretty much the only way to do it right now. And they also provide value for money, if you buy them at the right price. So how does it help you manage your risk? I mean, in the short term, there's potentially value. There's, we see the prices have been quite high, the price curves in backwardation, so perhaps you can buy it on a structure that allows for the price to be smoothed out for the current high prices that we see. Your flexible supply contract normally provides you with market access, so it's not really giving you a sort of risk management capability in the short term, but it does give you an alternative to your existing supplier and their trading base. In the long term, it's all about price certainty. You can fix all or part of your consumption to protect yourself from higher prices. And it helps you with this managing the risk, because ultimately you're buying electricity from the generation of the future. We've discussed in the last forum, and I asked the question about whether or not we're going to see any new CCGT or coal, and we're not going to see any of that really coming online in the next decade or so, unless it's going to be coming online with some form of subsidy. And arguably, it's about the market delivering the generation it needs. Otherwise, the government will deliver it for you. That's a bit about our experience. I won't go into it, but obviously we've got quite a lot of experience of actually putting these types of contracts in place. And we typically see them as being 10 to 15-year contracts. There's also, they tend to be longer than 5, because if you wanted to buy a short-term contract, you pretty much do it through the market. When you're considering a PPA, there's lots of things to think about. Who are you going to buy from? What technology are they going to use? How long is it going to take for it to actually be built? Is it already generating? How long are you going to buy for? How much are you going to buy? What's the pricing arrangements? How is that power going to get to you? Maybe you need to involve your supplier. Do you have to put credit up? And is it going to cause you any accounting problems? There's a range of pricing structures. I think this is, we see some people will buy on a market index price. Doesn't provide a lot of certainty, but can provide you with a renewable, sustainable requirements if that's what you're looking for. the other sort of structures are really about trying to find a way of providing the generator with certainty. Some people do an index price with a floor. That helps generators who are looking for financing. Some go for a fixed price. That's quite clear. Everyone's certain as to what they're going to get. Other people want some market exposure, but ultimately some certainty on the downside, some certainty on the upside. And that's so a collar type structure is also seen in the markets. Then you have to look at how you're going to take the volume. Are you going to take it base load? If you buy a base load block, you're going to leave the generator with the uncertainty of its generation profile. But it could work well for you because you can just sleeve that into your contract, under your flexible contract. If you buy it variable, then you have a whole host of other considerations to look at. How you're going to manage the variability of the generation profile. Who's going to balance that in terms of predicting what's going to be produced when and selling it into the market or buying the residual from the market when it doesn't generate? And what happens if the price goes negative? Should the generator switch off and stop generating, or should it keep generating and you pay it not only to generate, but also have to pay, avoid or miss out on the possibilities of buying power at negative prices? So there's a range of structures. You could do it direct wire, so put the generator next door to your facility, then the power comes across the fence, and that actually avoids a lot of the sort of non-commodity costs that are discussed a lot. Alternatively, you can buy it from the grid, and then you have to look at how that gets to you. Do you put it through your current supplier? Are they going to let you do that? Or do you use someone else to help shape it into baseload? Alternatively, and we see this quite a lot and popular with the American corporates, doing virtual PPAs, where basically these are done under ISDA contracts. So they're financial contracts, providing you with a price hedge, but without all the hassle of having to take the electricity. So lots of options. How to move forward? I think the main thing to say is, if you're interested, come and talk to us. The markets only work when we meet. Thank you.
Excellent. Right. Thank you, James, for that excellent presentation. If you'd like to join them, in fact,
I'll go and take a chair over.
Okay, so that was a great presentation. I think if you're new to PPAs, that was a very good introduction to what corporate PPAs are all about. What I'd like to do before we kick off with questions, while you think of your burning questions, I'd like to ask the panel just to introduce themselves, just to give a 1-minute introduction to yourself and your business, and we'll start with Joanna.
So I'm Joanna Ellis. I work for Centrica in the origination team. So looking at route to market across the board on PPAs, either corporate or direct from generators. Route to market for gas, batteries, kind of you name it, we're looking at it in that space. So I think one of the big things we're looking at the moment is how to kind of move away from the more traditional corporate PPA structures where it's a long-term arrangement, probably 10, 15 years, waiting for things to be built, and looking at other things that you can do around existing PPA portfolios where you can get your renewable power, but you don't necessarily have to have a named source, or you can have a named source. How do you flex away and get into more of that 5 to 10 year space where it might be easier to get something done, but as James said earlier, you're not committing for that long term and you're outside of the liquid market window. Also things around how can you do things creatively around credit, portability between supply contracts. So looking at kind of the new world of corporate PPAs as well as the old world where you're getting additionality from new sites.
Thank you. And Pierre.
Yeah, so my name is Pierre Bartholin. So I cover the corporate PPA sales activity in Europe for Lightsource BP, which is a pure solar developer with presence in more than 10 countries. And one of our main business model is really to build some unsubsidized solar projects to find an off-taker and build this long-lasting relationship through corporate PPAs where we really look for, I would say, a balanced negotiation between us and an off-taker, because as James indicated, there are many criteria that varies from different discussions, and that takes quite some time to negotiate, but then we are on the same boat for many years, and that offers off-takers many opportunities to, of course, source green electricity and also reduce volatility in your energy bill.
Thank you, Pierre. And Ulrika.
Ulrika Weising. I'm heading up our initiative in Principal Finance on solar. And we're kind of a fully integrated, vertically integrated developer, builder, owner of assets. So we actually do the entire value chain, including, of course, the finance of it. We're active across Europe, but most of our activities historically has been here in the UK, and we're building lots of on-site, so direct wire type of installations this year. And kind of looking, I find it a little bit amusing to call, old PPAs, because there's nothing old about PPAs. It's a new market, it's a growing market, but I take your point that there's so many different versions of PPAs that are out there and will be out there because it's a continuously evolving market. I think that from a kind of a cost-saving perspective, and also a PR perspective as well for firm, is on-site PPA will always be cheapest. So I always recommend companies to look on-site first, if it's possible, and then go for the additional need, because you can never meet an entire site needs on-site, because of because it has to follow the solar curve. And if you're a 24/7 operation, that's never going to meet your entire electricity demand. So think about it as a balanced portfolio, and that can mean also looking at some existing renewables. It can also be looking at new off-site or new on-site PPAs as well.
Great, thank you. So some interesting stuff there. And who would like to start off with a question? Do we have a question from the audience? Okay. We do.
I'm just interested, as somebody just said there, it's a new market sort of thing, all moving on automatically, and the sales point is you buy long, as in 5, whatever, 10, 15 years. We always work to I'm not public sector, but we always work to a variable market. I'm quite interested in Centrica in particular, looking to shorten that thing, because I think we would, convincing your powers that be that you have to go like direct wire or whatever, but then the supplier then goes, please go 10 years. I've got to convince my thing. I just like the shorter term angle.
So it's shorter term PPA. So Joanna, I mean, you're asked directly.
Perhaps I didn't word that quite correctly, but what I'm trying to say is, convince my business case is a shorter term PPA.
Yeah.
The supplier always wants longer term, surely, for their own reasons.
It's a good question. So Joanna would.
So I think it's about finding that balance. So traditionally, why the very short term on PPAs maybe hasn't been as attractive is you've got a 3-year liquid traded market. So under any existing flex contract, you can probably fix around market anyway within your existing contract. So to see a real benefit of doing a PPA, you probably need to push out to at least that 5 years to start to see some of the unliquid period and get some certainty in an area that the market just cannot provide you that certainty, or isn't taking a big discount in order to kind of bear that risk themselves. So I think what we've been looking at doing, we've got one of the largest PPA portfolios in the UK with a combination of the Centrica and the NEAS PPA portfolio. And at that point, you can start looking at your existing PPAs and saying, okay, we can give you named REGOs. You can do a fixed or a floating or a sort of a discount to index kind of structure at that 5-year period. Or maybe you do 5 plus 5 or 10 plus 5, however it fits into kind of the buying scheme. Or maybe you look at different volumes, higher volumes in the front end, slightly less in the second. So you can kind of shape it how you want. And I think exactly as Ulrika's point earlier, it isn't a one-size-fits-all, or you just do this. It's something that you can use as part of your strategy, and you can still have your flex supply contract sat on top. You might have a direct wire PPA or a new build PPA sat behind as well. And it's about layering those different things up to kind of give you that more balanced risk management profile.
Okay. think the more supplies come on, there's more PPAs around and more people, that's what's going to happen, surely.
Yeah, and
Layering it up.
exactly. And also I think one of the benefits of the slightly shorter term stuff, I mean, I think in all honesty, kind of, I'd say the sweet spot from a Centrica perspective is that 5 to 10 year slot. Is also, it becomes easier to manage on a credit perspective as well, which is always, that's always a conversation that has to be had when you're looking at longer term arrangements as well.
Yeah, if I may add, that also depends, I guess, on the motivation of the off-taker. If you are only looking to, let's say, promote energy transition and you want to invest in a new asset to be built, then in that case you need to turn to new projects. And since, either for wind or solar assets, they have a duration of life of maybe 30 years, in terms of financing, we have some constraints where we cannot really go below 10 years. Otherwise, it's challenging to get some financing structures there.
And again, it's what Ulrika said. If you look on site first, we've got masters of site, and we should be looking at these fields that we're not using, and that's where we should be going. And then,
I'd also jump in and say that a lot of people have a very short-term, buy from the market in the front 1 or 2 year strategy, and that's primarily driven by legacy. That those are the products that are available in the market to buy. People have not tended to trade longer than a couple of years, because partly for reasons of credit, but mainly because they were using gas or coal plants, and you were therefore having to fix the gas and the coal price in for 5 years. So in effect, the market wasn't giving you the opportunity to buy long-term contracts, so you never did. If you look at markets like Sweden, where is our home market, we trade 10-year contracts regularly with customers. Why do we do that? Because all our generation pretty much comes from hydro, and the hydro doesn't have a fuel cost. So we can make a market for the longer term, and customers buy products for the longer term for certainty. But in the short term, from a gas and coal stations, you can't do that. And so therefore, your market has been generally limited to those products, and everyone's got used to it. But that's not to say that's the right solution for you. And these are alternative options for you to look at.
It's educating the buyer.
Yeah, I mean, if you're coming from the public sector, I mean, you're not really too much in competition with global markets. So, I hope not.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, but public sector's sometimes a little bit behind we've always done it this way, so we'll carry on. Innovation is trying to sell that little product, for 5 to 10 years, and it takes somebody to actually batter that door down and say, this is the way forward.
And I don't think any one of us would recommend you buying all of your consumption for 10 years in one go. But what we said, I think we see this idea of a layered approach to managing risk. Have some longer term contracts in your portfolio for a percentage of your consumption to sort of help you build up some price certainty and get some budget certainty from year to year.
Okay, very good. Oh, we've got an array of hands. Okay, we'll go over here first and then over to you.
A bit of clarification on this private, what you call it, direct supply. If you have that as a customer, does that remove all the other charges like CCL and subsidization, etc.?
Yeah.
But presumably, if it goes via an electricity company, then you kind of get all those and your costs as well. So that would make it a lot less attractive, I guess.
Well, I think what you're going to see is that, yes, for private wire, when you connect behind the meter, a majority of the distribution costs and levies you don't have to pay on that electricity. And that's why it's always going to be the cheapest form of PPA that you can have. But on the grid-connected stuff, we're seeing, lot of grid-connected system, both solar and wind, being built at, below wholesale cost today, which means that it's going to cost you the same. You're not necessarily going to get a lot of price reduction, but it's going to cost you the same, and you can lock that in for a longer period of time. So I wouldn't expect anybody today to pay more than they are paying today from a PPA.
The costs. Yeah, you're right. If you put it's like putting panels on your roof. If you supply yourself or have a supply directly next door to you, then you can avoid the supply license requirements, which where all these on costs come from.
And
One thing you've got to remember is these are regulation sort of loopholes. So if they change it in the future, then you could suddenly find that you have to the costs go up. Ultimately, the government will allow a certain amount of leakage through the system, but if everybody does it, someone's got to pay for the grid and all the subsidies that are already committed to. So that's what we're seeing to a certain degree with the charging reviews that are going on. They're trying to close down some of these benefits. So, but if it makes sense for your business to have generation next door for reasons of security of supply or other reasons, then it's definitely a good idea.
Interesting. So potential there for a private PPA levy type thing to try and recover this lost revenue.
To be honest, this will never happen. Look at what happened in Spain. There was a sun tax, and it was a catastrophe, because you have to look at it from a systems perspective. We have a carbon budget that we need to meet. We have a clean growth strategy in this country that is promoting distributed generation, smart, renewable, right? So for those two to be completely ignored, and the government putting in some sort of on-site generation, renewable generation tax, to me, it's just not going to happen. Also in light of what's happened in other countries and how it's backfired completely.
Having said that, we're in a climate change movement. We've also got EV on the rooftops.
Yeah.
But when we do the calculations of the CCA, we have to add in EV because we'd be getting double subsidy in a way.
Well, so the reason that is because the climate change agreement doesn't allow for you to count the on-site generation because it's subsidized. Today, we're building completely unsubsidized. For the next climate change agreement that is in negotiation, unsubsidized on-site renewables, the suggestion is that you're going to be allowed to credit for that in the climate change agreement. But that's also for all of you as users to work with your trade associations to influence those climate change agreements. Because the reason why you can't count it today is for that double counting. You can't get two subsidies for the same thing. But if the renewable is unsubsidized, there's no reason why you shouldn't be allowed to count that.
Very good point. Very good point.
Yeah, just to complement on the feasibility, so it doesn't have to be on-site, such as solar rooftop, that can be like adjacent to your site or to your consumption, up to 5 kilometers. And in that case, you build a proper private wire, and that's not connected to the local grid.
Okay, so we had a question from the front table. Do you still?
Yeah. Caroline Dilkin and Res. With the unsubsidy or no subsidies now in renewables, how important are corporate PPAs to get these new energies onto the market, new renewable energy onto the market?
From a financier perspective, they're very important. We would not be able to finance a fully merchant installation that's just feeding into the grid. We just wouldn't get approval for that because you need that long-term certainty for your investment. So I see them as extremely important.
Yeah, I mean, as a developer, we have two ways to the market for unsubsidized project. It's either a utility PPA or a corporate PPA, and they are more or less the same terms.
Yeah, from our perspective, we still build renewable generation off our own balance sheet, based upon our own views on the long-term power curves. However, we also see a benefit to consumers of buying and locking in, and we offer these types of contracts over in Sweden. So where the 10-year market trades actively. So from our perspective, it's just about trying to bring the benefits that other consumers are seeing across Europe to the UK.
Do you find that the scale of the project makes a difference? So larger scale, sort of big offshore wind tend to be backed with utility PPA type arrangements because of the scale of them, and maybe corporate PPAs tend to be suited more to smaller scale developments where they're a little bit more self-contained and easier to broker up? Or
I think if you're looking from a developer who's looking to finance the project based upon the corporate PPA alone, then it's a lot easier to execute a smaller scale project with one off-taker than having to have a multiple of off-takers. And when you look, I mean, with solar, it's not necessarily so much of an issue because the volumes you get out of a solar site are relatively low per annum. If you take a 10 megawatt solar plant and a 10 megawatt wind farm, you'll get 3 times the amount of energy out of a wind farm as you will get out of a solar park. So you need to find 3 times the consumer volume to provide the corporate PPA for a wind farm. And as you make that larger and larger and larger, so like for example, a 10 megawatt wind farm would be 30 gigawatt hours per annum of power. And now if you as a consumer, how much do you want to buy as a corporate PPA as a percentage of your load? It starts to become quite hard to do it as a single consumer unless you're one of the very largest consumers in the land to buy a very big project. From our perspective, as a utility, we are looking to split this up and provide it to consumers at the volume that they want. But if you're very much a developer with a model that is, I need to have everything in place before I actually put a spade in the ground and build this thing out, then you will be looking at maybe smaller projects just because the risk of trying to line up more than one contract on the corporate side is much more difficult than just doing one alone. So smaller projects tend to be more beneficial.
Okay, any other questions from the audience? We have a question over here on the left, or my left, your right.
James Lewis at Schneider Electric. When we find we're advising on these deals, it takes sort of 9-12 months or thereabouts to get done. And it's great to have there are lots of good renewable energy projects out there, but actually getting them done is always the challenge. And I think internal alignment, internal engagement is the place we probably spend more of our time advising on. I just wondered if you've got any comments or thoughts on what the big barriers are within corporations and how you overcome them.
Excellent question. Well, the barriers.
Well, I think one of the barriers has been brought up today, and that is those short-term contract that a lot of corporates are still struggling with a longer-term contract. And understandably so. I mean, lots of corporates, they grow and shrink, and how can you have a certainty for 15 years or 20? So I think that's actually the major barrier, often overcome by a renewable decarbonization agenda in those corporates. So to me, it's a long-term contract challenge.
Yeah, I mean, to support what you say in terms of internal alignment, it's really critical that within the organization you get, the controlling teams, accounting, everyone well understanding all the implications, because it's not a standard contract. And as when we go to negotiate maybe for 6 to 12 months a contract, we don't want to end up realizing that there is an accounting issue when it comes to consolidation, for example, and that just blocks the negotiation. So yeah, we make sure that in terms of education, all the criteria have been considered.
I think I completely agree that the biggest challenge is the comfortableness with term and longer term, but there's also the issues around shape, and there are kind of steps you can take towards it. So maybe you enter that market doing, as James had on the screen earlier, where you have a base load and an off-taker looks after the variability side of things, and then you can move more towards being comfortable with full shape exposure and understanding that market further. So there's kind of an education process and maybe steps along the way before you get to the being fully comfortable with the long-term, maybe private wire or what have you, exposures, because it tends to be on the consumer side. You understand your shape of your own offtake exceptionally well, but if you then layer on an intermittent shape from a renewable load, what does that do to your shape pricing within your existing contract? So there's that as well.
I think I would just say, add to that, is that when it comes to looking at these types of longer term deals, it's senior management buy-in upfront will help you get a corporate PPA over the line a lot quicker. if you had a discussion with your finance director, particularly around the credit aspects, before you go to the market and start discussing corporate PPA, you'll have a very good idea as to what will and won't fly with your own business. If you bring it up at a later stage, that's when you end up having to go back and restructure or rearrange the PPA, or even abandon the whole process because your CEO doesn't believe you should be involved in long-term energy contracts. You need to get that internal alignment clear before you approach it. And then it's really about just finding the right and best deal for you and getting it done. And there's loads of advisors out now in the market, as you'll know, who are more than capable of helping you in the execution process, getting the best deals over the line. But you need to be clear that you want to do them.
Excellent. So be prepared up front, socialise it within the business. The big decisions, aren't they? They're long-term decisions. Certainly when I was at Tesco, the hardest thing wasn't really convincing anybody of the, whether it was worthwhile doing it from a renewables point of view or even a commercial point of view. It was actually getting them over the line to sign that 25-year agreement, and not least because they're all kind of like non-standard, bespoke kind of contracts and so on. But yeah, look, we're just about out of time. So what I'd like to do is just to ask the panel to give just a 30 seconds of 1 minute kind of précis of where you think the future of the market's going, why you're excited about the PPA market moving forward, before we wrap up.
Okay, well, I'd just like to say that we're here to sell you the energy of the future, which is renewables, and we're giving you the opportunity to buy it now for the future. So, as it says on the screen, if you're interested, come and talk to us.
I think it's a very exciting time to be in the energy business, just full stop. The previous panel said it as well. We're in a transition. We're going to see, in the next... Somebody asked me, when do I think that, we're going to see the same cost of electricity from batteries than we are from gas generation, for example, in the UK. And it's just impossible to predict, because if you look at the history of renewables and how it's evolved just in the UK for the last 5 years, nobody 5 years ago would have predicted that we would have this growth that we've had. So it's just super exciting. I think from a PPA perspective, we're just going to see lots of different forms of PPAs. We're going to get comfortable with shorter term contracts, multi-party off-takers, and all of that is going to happen. And it's just very exciting to be part of that.
Thanks, Ulrika.
Obviously, I also think that that's a real momentum for corporate PPAs. And as a piece of advice, from our discussions to build internal support, we see many different organizations having some interest in some countries to try to have all the countries aligned to build, for example, a European corporate PPA strategy or a European electricity sourcing. And then you have some actors which can help to build this strategy and discuss different opportunities across Europe. And that helps to move forward within the internal process making.
So yeah, I agree with the rest of the panel. I think it's an exciting but also a challenging time to be in this market. I think it was discussed in the previous session about carbon pricing being here to stay and going up, so renewables really are a big part of that future. And what's exciting is that we're seeing new and innovative structures not just coming from our side, but also coming from the off-taker side. So there's a lot more to be done out there, and probably be sat here in 5 years' time thinking, wow, we never thought that would happen. So it is just about coming in and talking to us all and trying to figure out what the best way to the future is and what the mix looks like, because it's no one solution. There are a range of solutions, and putting that package together.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Joanna. Thank you, panel. So that concludes the